Despite their notorious deeds, not all outlaws in the Wild West faced justice. Here are some extremely rare photos of those elusive figures who evaded capture. The last one even became an influencer. John Herbert Dillinger. John Herbert Dillinger, a notorious criminal from his formative years, was the commander of the Dillinger Gang. The gang robbed 24 banks and 4 police stations. He was also arrested several times for multiple crimes, but he escaped twice. John Dillinger was not only a thief, but he was also a murderer. He was charged but never convicted for the murder of an Indiana policeman who shot him during a shootout. As the notorious criminal that he was, he chose death over being brought to justice. His death was ruled as a justifiable murder, in irony and great lengths. At least he got to decide his own fate, unlike Clay Allison. Clay Allison. Clay Allison started out as an ordinary cattle rancher and cattle broker, but soon his profession changed to that of a gunfighter. With his reputation for violence, he killed a gunman named Chunk Colbert. He also led a mob to kill Cruz Vega, who was suspected of murdering a reverend. These were not the only killings he carried out. He and his brother, John Allison, were later arrested and charged for manslaughter, but this charge was said to be dropped. Clay Allison had a private life. He was married to Medora McCulloch in 1881 and was succeeded by her and his 2 daughters, Patty Dora and Clay Pearl. His death was an accident. A wagon's wheel rolled over his head, crushing his head and neck. If you think his body must have been a horrible sight, you should see what the next Outlaws did. The Bloody Benders. Disguised as a perfect family, they conducted multiple killings. Their inn in Kansas was the stage for their multiple crimes. Their action earned them the name Serial Killers of Kansas. They conducted these killings by targeting travelers who stopped at their inn for meals and supplies. At first, this disappearance was not noticed, but it soon became a frequent occurrence. Their inn was later searched, and over 20 bodies were discovered, including that of a little girl who was around 7 or 8 years old. Despite the $2,000 reward, the Bender family was never found. Who knows if they continued their life of crime elsewhere? After all, that's exactly what Butch Cassidy did. Butch Cassidy. Robert Leroy Parker, also known as Butch Cassidy, was a train and bank robber. He was also the leader of a gang of criminals known as the Wild Bunch. His first criminal offense was in 1880, when he stole a pair of jeans and some pie. From stealing minor items, he progressed to robbing a bank in 1889. His proceeds from his first bank robbery were $21,000. He continued in this line of profession until he was allegedly killed by a gunshot in San Vicente. Allegedly because there were rumors of his survival. The next outlaw on this list happens to be his partner in crime, the Sundance Kid. The Sundance Kid. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, also known as Sundance Kid, was a member of the Wild Bunch gang. Henry came about the name Sundance Kid when he was in jail for 18 months for robbing a cowboy in Sundance, Wyoming. He was a ranch hand and a joint salon owner before his train robbery in 1892. He was also a good gunfighter who participated in a shootout with lawmen. Most of his crimes were hidden behind the Wild Bunch gang. He was believed to have been killed in a shootout in San Vicente alongside Butch Cassidy, the gang leader. When they don't get arrested, outlaws often end up dying in shootouts. However, this next outlaw did the wildest thing to avoid getting arrested. Harvey Logan. Harvey Alexander Logan, also known as Kid Curry, was a member of the Wild Bunch gang, a notorious gang for train and bank robberies as well as shootouts. He was referred to as the wildest gang member despite being less popular. He successfully killed at least 9 law enforcement members in 5 shootings and 2 other men on different occasions. Kid Curry was eventually captured and convicted of robbery. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison with hard labor and a fine of $5,000. He eventually escaped but ended up shooting himself in the head to avoid being captured again. Wild, but at least we know the end of his story. The same cannot be said for the next outlaw, Etta Place. Etta Place. Not a lot is known about Etta Place. She's believed to have had multiple identities. A few of those identities are Ethel Bishop, who was said to be an unemployed music teacher, Ann Bassett, who's a cattle rustler, and Eunice Gray, who's believed to have operated a brothel and died in a fire. Etta Place was a companion to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and she was romantically involved with the Sundance Kid. She was also an accomplice in the bank robberies conducted by the Wild Bunch. In the same way she appeared, Etta Place vanished from history with only rumors and myth to explain her fate. Another outlaw whose end nobody knows is the runaway Don Bogan. Don Bogan. After being blacklisted because of his role in a cowboy strike in 1884, Don Bogan became an outlaw. He carried out multiple killings. He killed an editor of a local newspaper, a constable, and 3 other men. He was arrested after that and placed in the back room of a saloon, since there was no jail at the time. During the arrest, he was injured, but despite that, he escaped a day later. Lack of medical attention and infection made Don Bogan surrender himself to the authorities. In 1887, he was convicted of murder and was sentenced to death. A month after his sentence, Don Bogan escaped prison, choosing to live a life on the run rather than face the music. While Don Bogan escaped from prison, this next outlaw never even went to prison once, despite all that he did. Jesse Evan. Jesse Evan was a gunman who started his own gang in 1875. His gang was usually referred to as the Jesse Evans Gang, but they called themselves the Boys. It was popular for robbery and cattle rustling. Down the line, the gang was involved in the Lincoln County War. The Lincoln County War was the highlight of his criminal life. During and after the war, Jesse Evan committed multiple murders. He was always at the forefront during the war. Another reason this outlaw gained attention was his disappearance in 1882, after which he was never seen or heard from. There are speculations that he lived in Florida under the name Joe Hines, but no proof was provided. He was never arrested, charged, or convicted for any of his crimes. Surely Jesse Evan was a smooth criminal in the Wild West. However, he's not as famous as this next guy. Billy the Kid. Henry McCarty, also known as Billy the Kid, was a notorious outlaw in diverse areas. He committed crimes like stealing, killing, and traveling with gang members. He's believed to have killed 21 men before the age of 21. He was also involved in the Lincoln County and New Mexico War, during which he committed 3 murders. His story started as that of an orphan at age 15, after which he carried out his first crime by stealing food. In the long run, Billy the Kid was captured, but he escaped from the courthouse he was held in, killing 2 lawmen in the process. This next outlaw is also someone who escaped from prison after getting caught. Doc Holliday. John Henry Holliday, popularly known as Doc Holliday, was a dentist, gambler, and gunfighter. He is prominently known for his role in the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. Holliday was diagnosed with tuberculosis at the age of 20, the same disease that killed his mother when he was 15 and his sister before his birth. Despite his illness, he still participated in crimes. Holliday and 12 others were indicted in Dallas for illegal gambling in 1874. In 1875, he was arrested for trading gunfire with a saloon keeper. His final days were spent in a hotel. He was killed by the sulfurous fumes of the spring. His life was cut short tragically at the age of 36, unlike this next outlaw who survived until old age. Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp was an American lawman and gambler. He was famous for the gunfight at the OK Corral. He was married to Arilla Sutherland, Sally Heckle, and Maddle Blaylock. He had multiple professions, both legal and non-legal. He was a lawman, buffalo hunter, saloon keeper, miner, brothel keeper, and boxing referee. He was arrested multiple times at the brothel where he was suspected to be a pimp. His first gunfight was in the summer of 1869. He was also the last surviving participant of the gunfight at the OK Corral before he died in his home from chronic cystitis at the age of 80 in 1929. Who says outlaws don't live long? Check out this next outlaw, who surprisingly is a lady. Rose of Cimarron. Rose Elizabeth Dunn, popularly known as Rose of Cimarron, was best known for her romantic involvement with the outlaw George Newcomb. She supported Newcomb's outlaw life and began carrying tasks for him since he was a wanted man. Her brothers were also outlaws who became bounty hunters and called themselves the Dunn Brothers. Her involvement in Newcomb's gang earned her the title of an outlaw. She was said to have fired shots at the marshal in order to help Newcomb escape. That shootout killed 3 deputy marshals. She later married Charles Albert Noble and Richard Fleming, leaving the outlaw life behind her. She died in 1955 at the age of 76. While Rose was able to leave the outlaw livelihood behind, not all outlaws could be like her, even after marriage. An example is Jack Vermillion. Jack Vermillion. Jack Vermillion was popularly known as Texas Jack, a famed gunfighter. He gained lasting fame for his skills with a pistol and his association with Wyatt Earp. He was married to Margaret, who bore 2 children for him. During one of his tours, he lost his wife and 2 children to a diphtheria outbreak in his town. It was after this loss that established a reputation as a violent gunfighter. His most outstanding criminal activity was the gunfight at the OK Corral. He eventually settled down and married Nancy Fleener. Even after marriage, he still engaged in some gunfights with the conman Soapy. There are various rumors about his death. Some said he drowned, while others said he died peacefully in his sleep. While the cause of his death is not certain, this next outlaw certainly did not die peacefully. Soapy Smith. Jefferson Random Smith II, popularly known as Soapy Smith, was a con artist and gangster. He had a large hand in organized criminal operations in Colorado and Alaska. Soapy gained notoriety through his prize soap racket scam. The success of this scam and other scams enabled him to finance 3 successive criminal empires in Denver, and Creede in Colorado, and Skagway in Alaska. Soapy Smith was killed in a shootout in Skagway. His last words were, "My God, don't shoot!" He was never punished or arrested for his criminal activities. At least Smith was shot by an enemy, unlike Jesse James, who had to bear the pain of being betrayed at his death. Jesse James. Jesse Woodson James was a bank and train robber, guerrilla, and leader of the James Younger gang. Jesse was married to Zerelda Mims, and he had 4 children, including Jesse Edward, a lawyer. The James Younger gang robbed banks, stagecoaches, and trains in Kansas. In 1873, they turned to train robbery, where they stole approximately $3,000. The gang's downfall soon approached in 1876, when they tried to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. That bad raid killed 2 of their companions, but Jesse James escaped. He eventually died as a result of a gunshot to his head by one of his gang members. Getting betrayed might have nothing to do with intelligence, but this next outlaw was quite book-smart. John Wesley Hardin. John Wesley Hardin is a gunfighter and controversial folk icon. From a very young age, he was a perpetual lawbreaker. His first kill was at age 15, and he claimed that it was in self-defense. He was also a gambler turned lawyer. He was pursued by lawmen for most of his life, and by the age of 23, He was sentenced to 24 years in prison. He only served 17 years before he was released at the age of 40. While in prison, Hardin studied law, and once he was out, he wrote the bar examination and passed. Soon, he went back to his old path and killed a man. This next outlaw is also quite unrepentant, despite being in prison once. Belle Starr. Myra Mabel Shirley Reed Starr, also known as Belle Starr, was a horse thief. She came into the limelight of America's outlaws in the Wild West after her violent death. She was allegedly married to Charles Younger for 3 weeks. She also married a Cherokee man named Sam Starr. It was after marrying him and settling down with his family that her horse thievery crime advanced. In 1882, Belle and her husband Sam were charged for horse theft, to which they served. But in 1886, she eluded another conviction for the same crime. Her husband was eventually killed in a gunfight, and ever since then, nothing but gossip was heard about her. Unfortunately, not all outlaws are able to disappear like Belle Starr. See what happened to this next outlaw, for instance. Bill Doolin. Bill Doolin was a very dangerous and violent sociopath. Aside from being a sociopath, he was also a thief who robbed people of everything and anything. In his 20s, Bill Doolin joined the Dalton Gang. This was the start of a darker path. His first killing was in 1891 when he killed 2 marshals for trying to take his drink from him. He also participated in bank robbery with the Dalton Gang in 1892. Bill Doolin was later arrested in 1896 during his treatment for arthritis in his foot. Despite the predicament with his foot, Doolin escaped but was killed with a single gunshot to his chest by a U.S. Marshal 8 months after his arrest. While Bill Doolin died an ordinary death, this next outlaw became a legend whose life story was told for generations. Sam Bass. Sam Bass's criminal journey started when he was 20 years old. He befriended a man named Joel Collins, and soon they began to rob stagecoaches. From stagecoaches, he progressed to robbing trains. In 1877, Bass, Collins, and 4 others robbed a Union Pacific train. $65,000 was obtained from this robbery. A year after that, Bass was ambushed while trying to rob a bank. He was brutally wounded and died 2 days later, on his birthday. His criminal career produced the popular cowboy song, The Ballad of Sam Bass. It was tragic that he died on his birthday, but that's nothing compared to Jim Miller, the next outlaw. Jim Miller. Jim Miller was popularly referred to as Killer Miller in the Old West. He was a lawman, saloon keeper, gunfighter, and assassin. Despite his adventurous criminal activities, he had 4 children with his wife, Sally Clements. He was said to have assassinated a former deputy U.S. Marshal, as well as killed 12 people in a gunfight. During the time he operated his saloon, he became the deputy sheriff and town marshal in Pecos. His reputation as a deputy sheriff and town marshal was surrounded by multiple killings of Mexicans, whom he claimed were trying to escape. This period of his life soon faded, and he joined the Texas Rangers. He also began to advertise as a professional killer, charging $150 for each murder. He was later arrested, and upon awaiting trial, a lynch mob decided to take matters into their own hands and hanged him. Perhaps the people thought that if they let him be, he might escape and return to a life of crime, just like this next outlaw. Pearl Hart. Pearl Hart was married to Frank Hart and George Calvin. She committed one of the last recorded stagecoach robberies and was famous solely because of her gender. In 1898, Pearl received a message that she should return to her seriously ill mother. Not being financially buoyant, she acquainted herself with Joe Boot. This acquaintance brought about a mining job, but soon she discovered there was no gold. That was when they both decided to rob a stagecoach, which occurred in 1899. The proceeds from that robbery were $431. They were eventually arrested, and that was how Pearl's in and out journey to jail started. Pearl did not turn a new leaf. Instead, she reenacted her crimes and told tales of them. Speaking of tales, This next outlaw died right after telling his story to a newspaper reporter. Three-fingered Jack Dunlap. Jack Dunlap started his life journey as a cowboy, but later became an outlaw by robbing different banks. He was eventually arrested in 1893 and released in 1895. Three-fingered Jack, as he was popularly known, wasted no time joining the Blackjack, a Christian gang. Not long after that, he joined Bert Alvord's gang in 1898. This transition led to more criminal activities. They robbed banks and trains, broke into safes, and engaged in gunfights. After one of his robberies, he was seriously injured, eventually falling off his horse only a few miles from the robbery site. He was found by a passerby, but eventually died after giving an interview to Tombstone newspaper. This next outlaw also chose death over prison, and he was wild enough to end his own life himself. John Ringo. John Peters Ringo was an outlaw associated with the Cochise County Cowboys, who conducted multiple robberies and killings. He also took part in the Mason County War in Texas, where he committed his first murder. He was suspected to have taken part in the attempted murder of Virgil Earp and ambush of Morgan Earp, Wyatt Earp's brother. Aside from the attempted murder and ambush of the Earp brothers, Ringo also tried to kill Lewis Hancock for refusing a complimentary drink. John Ringo was also a man with a bad temper, and this reputation preceded him. He eventually took his own life after drinking himself to a stupor. This next outlaw, however, died before he even reached the legal age to drink. Billy Clanton. William Harrison Clanton, also known as Billy Clanton, worked at a ranch near the boomtown of Tombstone, where he stole livestock from Mexico and U.S. ranchers. He was one of the youngest outlaws in the West ever recorded. Billy Clanton was a member of a group of organized outlaws that had a conflict with Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp. The conflict was mainly because of the brothers' interference with the group's illegal activities. He also stole Wyatt's prized horse after Wyatt's arrival in Tombstone. He ended up killing the horse and sending a telegraph to James Earp. Billy was later killed at age 19 during the gunfight at the OK Corral. The next outlaw is his biological brother, Ike Clanton. Joseph Isaac Clanton, the brother of William Harrison Clanton, was also part of the Cowboys that clashed with Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, as well as Doc Holliday. He was there during the gunfight at the OK Corral. The only difference between him and his brother was that he ran from the gunfight. He later pressed charges against the Earp brothers for the murder of his brother. This charge was exonerated after a 30-day preliminary hearing, as an act of duty by lawmen. 6 years later, Clanton was killed as he attempted to flee from a lawman who was trying to arrest him for cattle rustling. Although this Clanton brother couldn't escape, this next outlaw escaped into the mountains to avoid the law. Christopher Evans. Christopher Evans was an American farmer who became an outlaw. He was also the leader of the Evans-Sontag gang. He was accused of robbing the Southern Pacific Railroad in California. After he killed the posses assigned outside his house on the outskirts of Visalia, he fled with his younger partner, John Sontag. They were able to escape capture for 10 months, even while being hunted by lawmen, railroad detectives, and bounty hunters. There was once a shootout, and as a result, Evans lost an eye and his left arm. He was also taken into custody but escaped with the help of an accomplice. Survival was difficult for Evans, but he endured for several months in the mountain before being lured out by the fake news of his son being ill. Among all the outlaws listed so far, this last one might have made the cleanest getaway an outlaw could ever hope for. Cole Younger. Thomas Coleman Younger was an American Confederate guerrilla during the American Civil War. He later became an outlaw leader of the James Younger Gang. He was also part of the Clement Gang that robbed a bank in Russellville, Kentucky. Since then, he's taken part in multiple robberies and was identified by witnesses. Soon, the gang moved from bank robberies and stagecoach robberies to train robberies. This mild shift in occupation aroused a detective agency's interest in their activities. They were hunted. Some of the younger brothers changed their names, and we dare say that Cole Younger changed his ways as well. He donated to the creation of the Prison Mirror, one of the first prison newspapers in the US. He also worked for the newspaper, as well as the prison library. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll be sure to give you more pictures from the old Wild West.